Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Context-Driven Pricing, the Evolutionary New Pricing Strategy. I am Rebecca Calagiaris, COO here at Impact Pricing, voice of our blogcast now, and the host for today's webinar. Before we dive in, three quick housekeeping items. First, please, now that it works, feel free to use chat throughout our session. It's a great way to connect to myself, to Mark, to our fellow attendees. And if you missed it, drop a note in there telling us where you're located and something that you love so much that you'd gladly pay more for it. So just drop those in the chat. If instead of a comment, you've got a specific question you want to make sure we see, you can drop those in the question and answer section in the bottom, and we'll get those as well. And then, as I said, we will be recording the session and sending it out early next week. So now, let's get to why we're here. Context-driven pricing. So why context-driven pricing? Simple. The old way is broken, right? Cost plus pricing anchors you to expenses. Static pricing ignores that willingness to pay shifts constantly. And value-based pricing, which many of you are used to talking about and listening about, it sounds good, but there is not a clear definition. So all of this results in missed profits, weakened advantage, misunderstood buyers, and context-driven pricing is designed to help combat those issues and is the single most profitable pricing strategy. And that's what we're going to show you about today. And of course, leading our way is the amazing Mark Stiving, founder of Impact Pricing and one of the world's leading voices on pricing and value, and a good friend.
All I could say is, dang, Rebecca, that was good. All right, can everybody see the slides and my face at the same time? Excellent. So today we're going to talk about context-driven pricing. And when I think about context-driven pricing, but by the way, I've been in pricing for what, 30 years, something like that. And I've been thinking about pricing. I've been probably retired January 1st, 2019, and yet I couldn't retire. I don't know about you guys, but it's just impossible. I love what I do so much. And I think what I love about what I do is I get to constantly learn, and then I try to simplify what I learn so that I can explain it and teach it to people. And this is just what I get the hugest thrill out of. And so that's where we are today, is we're going to talk about something that I've come up with recently. You're going to find out it's been in the works for 5+ years. But let's start with this. Bald men don't buy combs, right? We know that combs are valuable, but not to bald men. And so this has everything to do with context. This person is not getting value. I start every presentation I do nowadays with this one phrase: buyers trade money for value. Buyers trade money for value. And so this brings up three big questions to us: which buyers, how much money, and for what value? And if you think about everything that you've ever bought or the last thing you bought, I can tell you that there's only one reason that you bought it. It's because you thought you got more value for that than it cost you in money. There's no exceptions, right? That's how we make these decisions. And so we want to start thinking about, what is that value concept? And so here's where context-driven pricing actually came from. This is the origin story of context-driven pricing. In 2019, I posted this on LinkedIn. What is value? What is value-based pricing? These phrases are used a lot, and many of us have different meanings when we say them. Would you please share with us your definition of these two terms? And I got an amazing set of results. And the results were essentially these, right? Some people said it's value in use. So I think of that as inherent value, or what's the value of solving the problem. Some people thought it was willingness to pay. And by the way, I fell in that camp. I like willingness to pay as a definition. Some people thought it was consumer surplus. So think of that as how much benefit I got above and beyond the price I had to pay. Some people thought it was value in choice. So that would be relative value, or we often think of EVE analysis, economic value estimation, the way Nagel taught us. We would think of that as value in choice. Or one person actually said they thought it was profit for the seller. The thing I took away is nobody agrees with me with what value means. And so how could we use value-based pricing? And as I stepped back to think about this entire concept, I said, look, I love willingness to pay as a definition of value, but I don't want to change everybody else's mind about the definition of value. By the way, here's why I would justify that. How much do I value having this shirt? It's really hard to answer that question. But I could say how much would I be willing to pay, and that's how much I value it. And so that makes sense to me to say, look, willingness to pay is a good representation of value. But I also get it that there's a whole bunch of other definitions of value. We see a bunch listed right here. If you're curious, in December 2019, I also wrote a blog, and Rebecca put that in the chat for everybody if you want to grab it or take a look at it. So this was the blog I wrote that just had everybody's answers to the questions. And so you'll see who answered and what they answered. It's not me trying to hide anything. And so this is what drove me to start saying, I think willingness to pay is the right answer for pricing, even if it's not the right answer for value. And so, what is the single most profitable pricing strategy that we could ever have? And that's charge what a buyer is willing to pay. No, JD, I didn't write it on that day. That's just happened to be a Monday and it went out on that day. And so charge what a buyer is willing to pay is like the best strategy you could ever have because you couldn't charge more. And if you charged less, you'd leave money on the table. So that just makes sense. And so then we had to name this, and naming it willing to pay pricing is horrible. Oh my gosh. And so we just started thinking about what was really happening and the fact that every buyer pretty much has a different willingness to pay. And so we came up with this phrase, context-driven pricing. We've lived with it for several years internally, and I have to say it fits so well, and hopefully you guys like it and learn to use it and learn to adopt it, but it's totally okay if you don't. But I want to say that all buying is contextual. All buying. So I want you to think about any product and two people that are buying that product. I guarantee you they're different. I guarantee you they have different problems, or there's a different situation, or there's a different context, or there's a different something. No two people are identical. No two purchases are identical. No two willingness to pays are identical. And so if you think of it that way, every time someone buys something, it's based around context. What's that person's context? We're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of our buyers, and we want to understand what is each buyer thinking. And so I just want to quickly go through this. You guys all would know this if I took the time to ask and actually ask you for the answers. But let's say it cost us $20 to build something. And we were able to read a buyer's mind, and this buyer is willing to pay us $100. How much should we charge? Well, hopefully you're all sitting there thinking, well, we should charge $100 because, well, that is the maximum price we could get. But what if we said that it actually costs $50, not $20? The buyer's still willing to pay $100. Now what's the price? Well, it's still $100. What if it costs us $150 and the buyer's still willing to pay $100? Now what's the price? Well, we're obviously not going to sell to this buyer, right? It's either the wrong buyer, the wrong market, the wrong something, but we're not going to sell to this buyer. But the key point is, it is absolutely impossible to price better than willingness to pay. It is absolutely impossible to price better than willingness to pay. Aaron, in a couple minutes, I'm going to really define or dive into the difference between value and willingness to pay. So just give me a couple minutes and we'll take a look at that. I think of this context-driven pricing as a unifying theory of all of pricing. So here's a list of a whole lot of different pricing strategies, techniques, methods that we all use. I've used every one of those except for the four on the bottom. I've never used them. But if you look at every one of those, right? Value-based pricing, behavioral economics, economic value estimation, that's Nagel's, economic value calculations. Every one of these, what we're trying to do is figure out what a buyer is willing to pay. It turns out that we've always been saying, let's figure out what a buyer is willing to pay. We just didn't have the name of a pricing strategy to say, this is what we're trying to get accomplished. Because what we really want is to understand how much is a buyer going to pay so that we could set our prices in that level. Now, there is one pricing strategy that we're not talking about, that we're not encompassing as a unifying strategy, and that's cost plus pricing. Cost plus pricing is inside out. It has to do with what's going on inside our company. It doesn't have to do with what our buyers are willing to pay. And so if you're using cost plus, then you're probably not doing a version of context-driven pricing, but that's okay. Right? We want to get you off of cost plus anyway. So let's dive into context-driven pricing for just a second. And I have three tenets that I found exceptionally valuable when thinking about this and when talking about this. The first tenet is willingness to pay is contextual. You saw me say earlier that all buying is contextual. And so when someone's willing to pay something, different people are willing to pay different amounts. The same person is willing to pay different amounts based on the context or the situation they find themselves in. So, for example, an umbrella is more valuable on a rainy day than on a sunny day, right? And so willingness to pay has everything to do with the context. The second tenet, willingness to pay, is malleable. This is why we have sales teams. This is why we have marketing teams. We're trying to communicate the value of what we do to our buyers so that they grow their willingness to pay. Now, hopefully that willingness to pay it exceeds the price that we're asking for. That willingness to pay could be relative to whatever the competitive alternatives are. We'll see that in a minute. But the key point is we have the ability to influence a buyer's willingness to pay. And so when we start to think about pricing, we want to start to think about how do we get our salespeople to sell value? Because the better they sell value, the higher our buyers, the more our buyers are willing to pay. Now, the third tenet, my favorite of all the three tenets, perfection is impossible. And I like this one the best because I have no idea how much someone's willing to pay in any circumstance, in any situation. I'll never get you to your maximum willingness to pay. It's impossible. There are always constraints that keep me from charging exactly what somebody's willing to pay, besides the fact that I can't read your mind. And so I love this tenet for the following reason. Your goal isn't to get to perfection. Your goal is to be better tomorrow than you are today. That's what this is really about. So when we start thinking about contexts, oh God, JD, you're absolutely right. They don't even know their own willingness to pay. I mean, think about it. Last time you bought something, do you know how much you're willing to pay? Right? You're just asking, am I going to buy it or not? Is the value worth more than what we paid for it? So absolutely right. And so I think taking on willingness to pay as our objective, as our goal, is exactly what we want to do to be better and better at pricing or at business. Okay, so I'm going to go to Aaron's question, or we're going to start to attach that one. Buyers trade money for value. I still believe that, even though I just talked about willingness to pay for a long time. Buyers trade money for value. And so, what is value? So, we're kind of going back to that question that we talked about in 2019. What is value? And everybody has different definitions. And so typically I ask this of my clients when I'm doing a presentation, here's a cup of Starbucks coffee. Is it worth it? And of course, nobody thinks this is worth it, right? It's $100 for a cup of coffee. Who's going to pay that? But I forgot to mention there are a couple gold coins at the bottom of the cup. Does that change your willingness to pay for this? right? And certainly it does. And what that tells us is that there's a huge difference between perceived value and real value. And what we're trying to do is figure out how we get customers to value our products. And we do that because we need to build a bridge between where we are and where our customers are. And we'll call this the bridges over the value gap because they don't perceive the value. We do that by building products that have real value. And the better we can communicate that value to our buyers, the more likely they are to buy. And so it actually takes both in order to craft this bridge. We have to have both real value and perceived value. But that still doesn't answer the question, what's value? After many, many, many conversations, I started to craft a couple thoughts. And so let's talk a little bit about the difference between willingness to pay and value. So first, you have to go with me on a little ride. Let's pretend like this blue circle represents a rational person's willingness to pay. Now, if you're in economics, you know that rational means that the buyer knows everything there is to know about it. They can make a super smart decision. And in fact, we're going to see it in a few minutes that in B2B, I often think of willingness to pay, or I think of value in B2B as incremental profit to our customers. So imagine for a second that a buyer could perfectly say, look, I'm going to make $1 million if I buy your product. What's their willingness to pay for that? And that's what this blue circle represents. Their willingness to pay for the true value they're going to get from your product. Now, there's an actual willingness to pay, which is different than the rational willingness to pay. This rational willingness to pay has everything to do with perceived value. What does this buyer believe? And so we take a look at what these intersections are, and the middle is perfect for us, right? The middle is what we'll call recognized value. The buyer recognizes the fact that they have specific problems they want solved. They know what the results are they might be able to get. They can calculate their incremental profit here pretty readily. And so that's really good value. On the far right, we have what I call beyond value. So this is where people are emotional. This is where people may use intuition instead of logic. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they think our product does something it doesn't do. Maybe a buyer is acting in their own self-interest as opposed to the company's self-interest. This is also where behavioral economics fits. In the world of behavioral economics, we do that to say, how is it that we can predict how our customers are irrational? And so if you think this is important, you hire salespeople that are good. You hire salespeople that are friendly and make people like them, right? And so I'm not diminishing this beyond value piece at all. It's important. And then we have unrecognized value. Unrecognized value are things that our buyers didn't know about our product. Or they're things the buyers knew, but they underestimated the results or the profit they might achieve because they buy and use our product. This is where I personally spend most of my time with my clients, is focusing on unrecognized value. All three of these are important when we start to think about how is it that we can get our customers to be willing to pay us more. Because if we can bring these unrecognized values and make them recognized, then the red circle becomes bigger. The red circle becomes bigger. And so I believe wholeheartedly that companies exist to create value for customers. Our job is to create that blue circle, make it bigger, make it valuable. But if we don't communicate that to our buyers, we don't get paid for it. If you could go with me and believe the fact that companies exist to create value for customers, then I have a really, really hard question. What's value? Right? How is it that we're going to go create value for customers? So I have now, after thinking about this for 6 years, come up with a new definition of value that doesn't fit any of the five definitions I gave you earlier today. And the definition of value that I have come to love is this: buyers have problems. Problems, of course, are not value. Problems are anti-value. It's the opposite of value. But value is the result of solving problems. Value is the result of solving problems. If we can learn to identify and articulate what our buyers' problems are, now we can understand much better what's the value we're delivering, because we can talk about those in terms of the results the buyers get when they solve these problems. I already mentioned this once, but I believe wholeheartedly that in B2B, value is measured in incremental profit. That incremental profit comes from one of three places. It either comes from increased revenue, decreased costs, or reduced risk. If you're selling to other companies, the only reason a company buys from you is because they believe they're going to make more profit after they bought and used your product than before they had your product. And so value could be measured in how much more profit we're going to make our customers. This is one of the reasons I love working in B2B, because we can put numbers on things and we can get to value that matters, as opposed to what's the value of this shirt. Now, if you want to know what the value of the shirt is, then we have to take a look at B2C and say, what's value here? In B2C, value tends to be personal benefit. It tends to be functional. So we might be thinking of the gas mileage you get in a new car you're going to buy. We might be thinking of the amount of money you save if you put solar panels on your roof. Right? So these are functional. We've got emotional. I really like the way this makes me feel. It could be social. It reflects who I am. But by the way, if you care about why I like this blue shirt, it's the only shirt I ever wear that people gave me compliments on. So I only wear it when I really care. All right. I'm going to go for just a few more minutes, and then I'd love to open it up and have conversations with you guys, answer questions, ask questions, etc. But now let's figure out how we make sense of this whole thing called context, and we're going to tie context back to value. So buyers are trading money for value. I'm going to introduce you to something I think of as the value architecture. Remember, all buying is contextual every time. And so I said we want to put ourselves in the shoes of this buyer and understand, what is this buyer thinking? But what we do know is this buyer is not thinking the same thing that this buyer's thinking, or the same thing that this buyer's thinking, or the same thing that this buyer's thinking. And so we need a way to make sense of this. I'm going to make sense of it using an example, if that's okay. And let's use Uber as an example. And now everybody, do me a favor and type in the chat why you would use Uber. Give me a use case, a problem you have. Give me a reason why you would use Uber. Don't want to rent a car when I'm traveling. Okay, perfect. Laziness, huh? Traveling and don't have a car. Going out drinking beers when I get home safe. Excellent answer. Excellent one, John. Thank you for doing that too, by the way. Faster way to get somewhere. Dropping my car off the shop. Yeah, there we go. Lyft is too expensive. Love that, Aaron. You're looking at the competition. When I need to go to the airport, none of my family's around to give me a ride. Easier than looking for a taxi, more transparent on where and how much it'll cost. These are great answers, right? Absolutely great answers. And so now I just want you to pause for a second and answer this question. How much should Uber charge? This is hard, right? Because if you think about all of these different reasons we just listed, these are all contexts, every one of them. Which one would they pay more for? Which one would you pay more for? You don't have to answer that. But Uber needs to come up with some strategy that says, how do I use context to get more people to pay me closer to what they're willing to pay? And so the standard consultant answer, of course, is it depends. What does it depend on? Who's buying? What is it they're buying? And what's the situation they find themselves in? This is context. So when we start thinking about context, value differs based on context. We've got different use cases. We've got different customer characteristics. We have different environmental factors. Our buyers use different shopping behaviors. I, I don't remember who it was, but someone is shopping Lyft and Uber at the same time. So that's a shopping behavior. And so we want to come up with a way to say, how does Uber make sense of all of this that's going on? And now remember, perfection is impossible, but can we get closer? And here's how we get closer. The value architecture starts with an entire population. Uber could sell to everybody. I mean, if you think about it, what Uber has is cars and drivers, right? And they don't even have that. They just have agreements with cars and drivers. And so what can they do in this whole population? Well, the first step is let's step back and say, what are our market segments we're going after? In this world of context-driven pricing or this world of a value architecture, the market segment is probably different than you've ever thought of it before. We think of market segments as what's the problem somebody's trying to solve? In fact, I'm going to use the phrase foundational problem. What's the main reason someone is going to buy from Uber? And so Uber actually has three different market segments. One market segment you guys are all familiar with, and every one of us wrote about an example in that market segment. I like to call it Uber people, but it's just Uber, right? It's us getting a ride in Uber. But I call it Uber people because I want to differentiate it from Uber Eats, right? No one wrote that they wanted to get McDonald's delivered to their house, but they do. Uber delivers food. And they also have a market segment called Uber Connect. Uber Connect is where they deliver Amazon packages. So if you think about it, they've identified these three foundational problems, giving people rides, delivering food to consumers, delivering packages for businesses. Inside each one of those market segments, now we can start to think about how do we create a product portfolio? How do we package our features so that we can make the most sense of our market segment? And so here we've got, let's just talk about Uber people for a second. We've got Uber X, Uber Comfort, Uber Rideshare, Uber XL, Uber Ski. I live in Reno. We have skiing here, Uber Ski, Uber Pets, Uber Teen, right? And so they've crafted a whole bunch of products because different buyers have different, and I'm going to call this one problem scopes, right? They've got different problems they're trying to solve, but it's all underneath that foundational problem of I need a ride. But there's details about those problems. Then, oh, by the way, let's jump over here to Uber Eats. In the world of Uber Eats, you and I might think that we're paying $5 for the delivery or get the delivery free. In truth, what Uber does is they sell different packages to restaurants. If you want your restaurant listed first on the Uber Eats app, you pay them a 30% fee, as opposed to if you want it rated wherever it falls, you pay them a 10% fee. So they're actually selling to restaurants, not to consumers, although they do get money from consumers as well. So let's go back over here to Uber people, and let's talk about a single product, Uber X. I need a ride from my home to the airport. I'm going to use Uber X. Well, guess what? For that one product, now we can do price segmentation. We can do price segmentation based on, let's call this situational context. So how many drivers are there? What's the weather? What's the time of day? How long is the ride? There are a lot of different things we could be looking at, but this is where we start to say, I'm going to put a different price on the product, on a specific product, based on the context that my buyer finds themselves in. Now, obviously, we can't price for every context. We're not going to get perfect, but we're trying to get better and better every single day. If you've ever heard me talk, you've probably heard me talk about concepts called will I and which one. I absolutely love these concepts. But the will I, when buyers make a purchase decision, they almost always make two decisions. The first one is, am I going to buy something in the product category? So are you going to go buy a new refrigerator? So this is the will I decision. And we make that decision really around the foundational problem. When we think about the foundational problem, why did I buy a refrigerator? Well, it could be that I need a refrigerator in my kitchen. It could be that I'm running a commercial kitchen and I need a really big refrigerator that's going to last forever. It could be that I need a refrigerator in my garage. Right? So these could be different foundational problems. And this is where buyers are using inherent value or the value of solving the problem. Down here at the packaging level, we've got a problem scope. I've got buyers choosing between, do I want Uber X or Uber Comfort today? And by the way, we have buyers choosing between, am I going to use Uber or am I going to use Lyft? So this is where I'm looking at what's the scope of my problem and can I figure out which one gives me the best value to help me solve my specific problem? And when we get to the bottom, this price segmentation we think of as situational context. And this is really what's driving a buyer's willingness to pay. If it's raining out, I'm willing to pay more for an Uber than if it's an easy walk in the sunshine. How urgent is my problem? How badly do I need to get it solved today? What's my budget? How much money do I have? How much time and effort am I willing to shop to get a better deal or a better price? And there's more, but each of these are situational contexts that we could start to understand to say, how much would I charge for that specific product, given the situation that someone's in? And so, given that buyers go through that process, we as companies get to make decisions. And what are the decisions we make besides what price we're going to charge? Up here at the foundational problem level, we get to decide what are our market segments? How are we going to communicate that high level value to our customers? At the problem scope level, we have to decide how are we going to package our products? How are we going to package our features into offers? I'm a huge fan of good, better, best. It doesn't always work, but when it works, it's beautiful. The problem scope is typically where we're setting a pricing metric. If you think about Uber Eats is charging using a different pricing metric. So percent of the bill versus Uber People is using a different pricing metric. And yet the pricing metric is relatively similar across the product portfolio. This is also where we create our list prices. And then down at situational context, we're thinking, how do we do price segmentation? And I often work with companies to figure out how are we going to go raise prices. And as we're raising prices, to me, the rule is we don't raise prices on everybody. It's not an across the board price increase. What's the situational context? Who is it that we would be willing to pay more? These are decisions we make as a company based on that value architecture. And so you as a company may not have that beautiful value architecture laid out today. In fact, maybe you're a platform. And so let me tell you a fictional story, and I'm going to say the word fictional 2 or 3 more times. Fictional, fictional, fictional. I'm going to tell you a fictional story about LinkedIn. And so LinkedIn started out as a platform, their resume storage and search, and you could put your resume up there and look for people. And if you wanted to, you could do more searches and pay them $20 a month. Well, and I have $100 written here, but we'll say $20 a month. And one day, some product manager was really smart, and he said, you know what? Recruiters get a lot more value from our product than anybody else does. We should build a special product just for recruiters. And so they identified the recruiter market segment and built a product just for them. And then some recruiters were willing to pay more than other recruiters so they could do price segmentation for that product. And they're saying, wow, this is really good. But we could do even better price segmentation if we had a product portfolio. So they created good and best. And then some other product manager said, I cannot believe that product manager got promoted just by coming up with recruiters. Let me think of what I could do. And he says, well, salespeople need this too. And so they created Sales Navigator. And they created good, better, best packaging for Sales Navigator. And then they created um, job seekers. Turns out LinkedIn has four different market segments: recruiters, salespeople, job seekers, and professionals, everyone else, right? That's all of us. In each one of those, they offer good, better, best packaging. So this is how you could start from scratch and say, hey, look, I want to go develop my own value architecture. And my recommendation is find a market segment that has a really high willingness to pay and go craft a product specifically for that segment. And now we can start to build that value architecture out. Okay, this is the very last section I want to go through with you. And that is, we talked a lot about context. We talked a lot about context-driven pricing and the value architecture. How do you start to find these contexts? And this is an exercise I use with my clients. It's pretty fascinating. It's usually I have them do 10 customers and a whole bunch of different marketable product features. But just for kicks, right now, what I want you to think about is what is a product feature that you have, that you offer, or you've worked with? And then can you think of one buyer who absolutely loves that feature and another buyer who couldn't care less or who doesn't like it very much at all, or at least not as much as the first buyer? And here's the point. Why did one buyer like it more than the other? And I can tell you the answer to the question. It's context. They might have had a different foundational problem. They probably had a different problem scope. They might have had different situational context. But as you start to go through many, many different features and many, many different customers, you start to realize, oh, this is what really is driving my buyer's willingness to pay. This is what's driving my buyers, how much they value my product, because they value these specific capabilities and not necessarily these other capabilities. And there's another way to start thinking about context. Most of you probably know I have a GPT out there called Pricing GPT. You can get it off the QR code. The URL is here. What I want to show you real quickly is one of the prompts I've built into Pricing GPT. And so the prompt, you start the prompt out with comma context, and then you simply write in some product and market segment, and it's going to give you a lot of context that you can start thinking through to say, does this make sense for us or not? And it's a great way to just brainstorm some contexts. And so let me pop over here to Pricing GPT. I'm going to do exactly what I just said. I'm going to type in comma context, and let's make it a family that wants Uber from home. Oh, my typing is horrible here. Home to the airport. There we go. And so what it's going to do is it's just going to come through and say, hey, let's think through some different contexts. So here's some different use cases. Hey, I'm running late for a flight. I'm traveling with small children. I have a leisure trip with flexible timing, snowy or bad weather, leaving on a business trip early in the morning. Then it's going to go through and say, well, give me some stable customer characteristics. These are likely going to drive more problem scope type issues. And give me some fluctuating customer characteristics. These are likely going to drive situational context or price segmentation type issues. Give me some stable environmental factors or some fluctuating environmental factors. What are some buying or shopping behaviors? I absolutely would not go create new pricing for everything that's on here, but I would look at this and say, how do I get better tomorrow than I am today? How do I find something that matters to my buyers that I could operationalize? Every time you find a difference for why one buyer would pay more than another buyer, it fits someplace in this value architecture. It's either a foundational problem, or it's a problem scope, or it's a situational context. As you start thinking through what are all these different contexts, what are all these different issues that our buyers are facing, we can start to say, where do we want to put it in our world? Where does it fit in the decisions that we're going to make? But as I wrap this up, last slide, all buying is contextual, right? Every time someone buys something, it has to do with what is their specific situation. And so let me tell you, I'm going to close with this one, and that is I've not told Uber this, but if I were Uber, what I would be doing is charging higher prices at Christmas time for people who want to ride to the airport because the airport parking lots are always full at Christmas time. So, what if we take that a step further and say, well, what if I could just know that the parking lots are full? Anytime the airport parking lot is full, I charge more to get a ride to the airport. That's context. So, that's all I got, guys. Any questions, thoughts? I'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to tell me, Mark, you're totally wrong, but I've been thinking about this for forever.
There are a couple of questions, both in the chat and the Q&A, kind of about the amount of different contexts that you're talking about and how do we prioritize which ones to focus on.
Yes, I'm just gonna scroll back to this picture for a second. First and foremost, you need to find the foundational problems. So these are context. This is what should be driving your market segmentation. And once we know what that foundational problem is, I think of that as a really high level context. Now we have more detailed context that say, I've got to craft my packaging. And so this is going to drive really important decisions inside your company. I mean, this focuses your company. This drives many decisions inside your company. And then when we start thinking of price segmentation, this is probably what you're thinking of when you think of which contexts matter. And I would say the answer is what is it that we have the ability to operationalize? So we know that this is happening. We can detect it in the marketplace. We can detect it in our customers. And then do we also have a way to change those prices over time or within the marketplace? So that's how I would be thinking about it.
Right, someone was asking about the pricing GPT link, which I put in here, but I will also include it in the email that we send beginning of next week with the follow-up with the video that will have the your pricing GPT link and also the prompt that you used for context.
Yep. Guido, I don't understand your question. Are you able to paste the specific sample prompt you used into your pricing GPT? I did do that, didn't I?
I think they're looking for what you put into GPT into chat here,
Oh,
the comma context, right?
yeah. Um, yeah, I can put it somewhere.
Also, Mark, I think one of the other areas that you've been thinking and working a lot on recently is sort of pricing AI. And I'd be interested in your opinion about context-driven pricing as it relates to AI pricing.
Oh, I didn't even mention AI, did I? So I'm going to apologize to Stephen Forth for that one. Um, so one of the things that happens, I think, in AI is it gives us a really powerful ability to learn more about context, to discover our context. So what are the different contexts our buyers are using, and then give us more clarity to figure out how we're going to set those prices. So I would think of AI as a tool to help me do the brainstorming. The other thing that I think is happening with AI, which is really important, if you remember the willingness to pay and the value bubbles, as AI becomes more and more of um, if AI is used more and more in the acquisition and the buying side, they're not going to care about behavioral economics, right? They're not going to have emotions. They're not going to have the, I need to get promoted if I buy this issues. And so more and more of the sale is going to move towards the rational willingness to pay, the true value, and it's going to move away from the red bubble, or at least the right-hand side of the red bubble, which is beyond value. So I think AI is going to help companies make better purchase decisions based on value.
There's some other questions coming in. I know you're going to love them. So let's see. John asks, how do you get your sales reps to better recognize the context so that they apply appropriate discounts based on context?
Thanks, John, for that one. I can't think of a great answer really quickly. I think the answer is going to be back to what are the problems, or what's our buyer's willingness to pay. I think the better we are as pricing people or as marketing people or as sales coaches able to understand this and document it and share it with our teams, the better they'll be able to do it. But I don't think they're going to do it easily without our help.
But again, the effort to sort of uncover the context that matter, those are information you share with the sales team so they know what they're looking for. Absolutely.
Yeah, we have to discover the context that matters.
And then, because I know you just did a blog post on this, someone asked if best practices on how to handle the backlash if people realize that the prices fluctuate based on the situation, right? They bring up the surge pricing for Uber and how angry it got.
Yeah. So first, let's talk about surge pricing for Uber. That was pretty interesting in the sense that Uber had to teach us that surge pricing was okay, right? That there was a justification for it. It took a long time for people to be comfortable with it, or at least not upset about it. What you'll find that Uber does nowadays, by the way, is they don't tell you they're doing surge pricing. They just tell you what price your ride's going to be. And so if you rode from your house to the airport on Uber many, many times, you would realize that price moves, but otherwise you wouldn't. So I want to address specifically what happens when a buyer finds out that they paid a different price than somebody else. So the first thing I'll say is that it rarely happens. People rarely share how much they paid. But if someone ever finds out, the answer is really simple. They bought something different, right? They bought it at a different time. They bought it when it was on sale. They bought it at early bird pricing. They bought a different quantity. They bought a different product. They bought something different. And so that's always the answer that I would give.
Here's another question from Ari. It says, they see how the context relates to willingness to pay, but does the willingness to pay account for what the market and competitors are charging?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I didn't explicitly say that. Um, so in the whole conversation I had about will I and which one, when people are making a will I decision, they're saying, what's the inherent value of the product? And so that inherent value is what's the value of solving the problem? So if I'm going to buy a new piece of factory equipment, how much more money am I going to make if I buy a new piece of factory equipment? Then once I say, yes, that makes sense, I want to go buy a new piece of factory equipment. Then I go on to say, okay, who am I going to buy it from? Which one am I going to go buy? And now what happens is I'm looking at, let's just say, two different competitive alternatives, and one's more expensive than the other. Is the expensive one worth it? And how do I know the answer to that question? Well, I look at what's different. What are the results I might get that's different? And this is where I call what we called relative value. So, what's the value of one object? So, how much more money am I going to make from the expensive one than I would have made from the inexpensive one? So, every time we make a which one decision, the price of the competitive alternative is driving is a huge factor in our decision process.
You might want to pull up your pricing GPT for this next one. We have a couple questions around that. One from Dick, who knows the things, has used some of these prompts before. He was asking kind of the difference between the context prompt and the problem prompt, which made Jim go, wait, are there other prompts that you're not telling me about? Like, are we being left out?
There are other prompts. I use Pricing GPT. Okay, what this is I've uploaded all of my content so that I can ask it questions, or you could ask it questions, and it would theoretically answer it the way I do. Just know that I never trust AI. I just don't trust it because I've seen it give me horrible answers before. But that said, I've crafted several different prompts in here, and two of them I like. One of a lot. One of them was the context one you just saw. The other prompt I use a lot is problem. And so I teach my clients how to write problem statements in ways that resonate with their market and that make more sense. And so if I just write a problem, and I'm going to write the problem, we're going to stick with Uber, right? I need to get to the airport. That's a problem. And so what ends up happening is it goes through and it says, hey, would Mark like that problem statement? And so I usually use four criteria. Is it first person? Is there emotion? Is there jargon? And does it reference a solution? And so I need to get to the airport. Gave me a decent start. It comes in and says, hey, let me rewrite that for you. I'm anxious about missing my flight and need to get to the airport on time no matter what. It offers a more specific version, a less specific version, and then probably my favorite part of this is it offers some potential KPIs. And this is really important if we're doing B2B. We want to be able to translate those problems into KPIs. So I use this quite often just to test, is this really a problem? Are we thinking through the right KPIs? And I think my clients like it.
We have another question from someone about uh, pricing when there's no obvious problem we're solving. So in this particular example, they talk about that they speed up the time they get recommendations. You talk about sometimes um, insurance, right? Where it's like a risk aversion, but I'm not really necessarily solving a problem. How does that affect pricing?
Yeah, so those are two different things, by the way.
Okay,
So-
that's why you're here.
okay. Um, so I'm not going to address risk aversion unless someone brings it up because it's hard. But I will address time to market or time to what was it? Time to reference
Tons of
recommendation.
recommendations. So
Yeah,
instead of 2 to 3 months, you get it fast.
yeah. And so here's what I'm going to say. First off, if it's not a problem, then no one's going to pay you money for it. Right? But it is a problem because you in your gut you know it's a problem, right? In your gut you know that this is valuable to somebody. And so what we have to do is we have to start to say, okay, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for them? And my guess is that the problem is I need better marketing tools faster. It may be I need more referrals or more referral business more quickly. And so somehow we're going to turn that into new business. If and so let's say that I've got 100 recommendations on my website today and you say, Mark, I can get you these next recommendations in a week instead of 3 months. I'll be saying I don't care. I mean, what difference does it make? But if it drives business for me, then I care. And so what is it that you're doing that really matters to a customer? There's got to be value if someone's going to pay you money.
All right. Those are the questions that have come in so far. I don't know if there's anyone else who has a comment or a question or any other. Oh, wait, do you have a manifesto?
Do I have a manifesto? Oh my gosh. So I just want to tell everybody this as you post this, I want to tell everybody I wrote a long article. Actually, I was starting to write a book on this and I decided I didn't want to because I got to write a pricing AI book instead. And so I wrote a long article on this. And then I asked ChatGPT, well, what if we just made it a manifesto? What does a manifesto look like? And it turns out a manifesto came back as like one page with a few key words on it. And so Rebecca took our one-page manifesto and made it beautiful, and she just put it in the chat. So I think you should all print this out and put it up on your wall next to your computer screen and sit there and look at it and say, hey, we should have made a slide out of that too, Rebecca. I don't know why we
Mhm.
didn't.
I don't know why we didn't either.
Here, watch this. There it
But
is.
another, oh, nice. We talked a lot about a lot of different things with context-driven pricing, Mark. What are you hoping that people will do tomorrow based on what we talked about today?
In all honesty, I put this together because I wanted the clarity And I've just been thinking this way for so long. My hope is that it helps other people in the clarity. I don't expect you to go change everything, do anything different. With any luck, we all start using a language that makes sense, and maybe this is the right language. But to me, it simplified pricing a lot.
Excellent.
So, all right,
All
we're
right.
going to give you 5 minutes back if there's no other questions.
Yeah. But thank you all for joining us. It was great.
And for
Uh,
those of you who know me, or even those of you who don't know me, I would love your feedback on this. So if you want to send me an email, send me a LinkedIn message, whatever, I just love to know what people think besides what I think. Right? So,
yeah. Debate pricing with Mark is one of his favorites. All right. Well, thank you. We'll have some more webinars coming up, I think, on AI and pricing and lots of other good topics. But please make sure you follow, and thanks for joining us.